Many years ago, Tony Robbins was on the big island of Hawaii, and he was getting ready to do life mastery. It was his biggest seminar ever. Thousands of people were coming. If you know much about Tony Robbins, he does stuff really, really big. He had thousands of people coming. They were coming from 30 different countries. There were 6 different languages that were being interpreted the whole time that it was going on. It was a big deal. And he'd planned his grand entry. You know, he's kind of a flamboyant guy, 280 pounds and 6 feet 7 inches tall. He's a big guy. He's hard to hide. And for his grand entry and the beginning of this 10-day seminar, he was going to zip line from 40-foot ceiling in the back of the auditorium down to the front center stage. He already had this mapped out. He'd been rehearsing it all week. He wanted it to be absolutely perfect. He'd gone over it and over and over. While he's on the zip line, he has a thought. That thought just struck him. He's just traveling real fast to be front center stage in the microphone, because when he hits the stage, the confetti's going to fall, the lights are going crazy, the music's going to get louder and louder. And he has this thought about life. And he asked himself the question, when do people start living? And the answer that came to him was when they face death. Boom, lands center stage, and he decides to go with it. Nobody knows what he's about to do. He just goes with it. He asked them that question, said, when do people start to live? Let me ask you this question. If you knew you only had 10 days left to live and there's no way you could get off this island of Hawaii, how would you live? What would you do? Who would you be with? Who would you thank? Who would you forgive? What would you give? What would you take? How would you live the rest of your life if you knew you only had 10 more days? And he left them with that question. And he just went in a totally different direction than he'd planned on going. Well, little did he know that he'd wrap up that seminar about midnight, finally get back to his room at 2:30 in the morning, lay down in the bed, nearly to sleep, and the phone rings. One of his staff members says, turn on the television. He flips on the television. An airplane had just flown into the World Center on 2001, 9/11. It was all over the news. A few minutes later, he gets another call. Somebody says, hey, we think it's got to be terrorism. It's an attack. Another plane just hit the other tower. Well, it's not long before his seminars start that day. He had no idea what was about to happen. But this idea came to him of, if you just had 10 days and you couldn't get off the island, how would you live? And that's exactly what happened. Those people couldn't get off the island. They shut down air traffic for several days after that. So he decided to make the most of it. A question he'd pondered for a long time was, why do people live where they live, especially when they live in dangerous places? When you think about this, why do people live in New Orleans? It's a fun place. It's a great place, but every 5 or 10 years, there's going to be a hurricane that may wipe them out. Why do people live in San Francisco, where there are earthquakes that could destroy their house and cause it to fall off a mountain overnight? Why do they live there? Because it's home. And he realized everybody has an emotional home too. And when the pressure is on, we default to our emotional home. So I want to talk to you today about your emotional home. I want to talk to you about how your emotional home will change as you understand the golden chain that God talks about in Romans chapter 8. It will change everything. Tony talked to those people that morning. He taught them about the 3 most important questions they would ever ask themselves. Question number 1, what is your focus? Question number 2, what does it mean? Question number 3, what are you going to do about it? So this is how we're going to unroll it today. We're going to look at your possible emotional homes. We're going to consider these three questions. We're going to look at this golden chain that God has created for us and how it can help improve your emotional home. So the hotel sounded like a fight everywhere. People were crying, they were yelling, they were screaming, they were cursing. It was a wild, wild time for them. And Tony divided people up. He said, please, please, please get with people that you don't know from different countries with different native languages, with different religions. I want you to get in groups of 6 and talk about how you're processing this. What are you going to focus on? What you can control or what you cannot control? What's it mean to you? What are you going to do about it? And he started wandering around. You know, he's hard to miss when he wanders up to your small group who's seated. He's kind of towering over you. And he listened to some groups, and there was one lady, she was just going after it. She had a strong, thick foreign accent, angry, 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 spewing venom everywhere. And after a little while, he said, excuse me, can I ask you a question? And I understand you're very, very angry. And she said, what? And he said, how often are you angry? And she said, what kind of question is that? What do you mean? Are you angry once a year, once a month, once a week, once a day, several times a day? And she started to answer him, and she stopped and she grinned. And she said, you know, honestly, I'm angry pretty often. And it's like jet fuel. It empowers me. That's her emotional home. Anger. Doesn't matter what's going on. She could have been mad about 9/11. She could have been mad because she got a double bed instead of 2 single beds. Whatever she didn't know. She can just be angry. That's her emotional home. He went to another group. There was a lady who was just crying. She was just sobbing. She was so sad. And he interrupted and said, can I ask you a question? How often are you sad? She didn't know. Once a year, once a month, once a week, once a day, several times a day. And she realized she's sad most of the time. Went to another group. There was a lady, she was talking. He just heard her say, I'm a registered nurse and I feel so guilty. I'm from New York City. Here I am on a tropical island, having a great time at a wonderful seminar, and I feel so guilty because they need me back home and I'm not there to take care of people. Same question. How often do you feel guilty? Once a year, once a month, once a week, once a day, several times a day? And she said, I feel guilty most of the time. When I'm at work, I feel guilty. I'm not home with my 3 kids. And when I'm at work, I'm thinking about other things I should be doing, I could be doing. And when I'm taking care of my patients, sometimes after I leave work, I feel like I didn't get enough done for them. I just feel guilty all the time. But I feel most guilty that here I am on a vacation when people need me back home. Those are emotional homes for people. Think about somebody may have 3 absolutely beautiful, perfect, well-mannered, brilliant girls, but they're not happy because they constantly worry and they're anxious about their girls. Think about a guy who's killing it at business, making lots of money, setting all kinds of records with his company, but on the inside, he feels like he's inadequate and he's a poser. He's not the real deal. Let's take a billionaire, somebody who's got $1 billion, but they're angry and frustrated all the time. Tony started out his career totally, completely focused on achievement. But as the years went by, he realized achievement is not everything. He shifted to fulfillment. And he said, when you shift your focus to things that are fulfilling, you focus on that. You see the meaning in things and you decide to do something about it. That's when fulfillment, satisfaction, meaning, and purpose begin to come to you. Enough about Tony. Let's look at the scriptures. Romans chapter 8. Last time we were together, we talked about Romans 8:28. We're going to pick up with that. We're going to look at 29 and we're going to look at 30. You're going to see this golden chain that God has put together for you. Romans 8:28 is probably one of the most misunderstood and inaccurately defined scriptures in the Bible. It's often abbreviated. People say, well, all things work together for the good. That's not what God said. All things work together for the good to those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. There are some people out there that all things do not work together for their good. It's to an elite group of people. Hear the word of the Lord. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. There is your golden chain. God foreknew you. Then he predestined you. Then he called you. Then he justified you. Then he glorified you. Now, if you understand this concept of the golden chain, everything shifts, because you realize no tragedy in your life can last, because God is causing all things to work together for your good. Well, what's your good? That you'd be conformed to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ. Everything that happens, God will give meaning to. God will give purpose to. He'll take the worst things in your life and over time make them the best things in your life, because you learn the lessons that make life better as you become more and more like Jesus. So we look at Romans 8:28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. What's his purpose? For him to be glorified and to do you good. That's the purpose of God. That's what he's up to. He is supposed to be glorified in everything, and he has chosen you to do you good, to cause all things to work together for your good. Some of you going through tough times. Some of you have been frustrated. Some of you have been disappointed. Some of you have been wounded, hurt, betrayed, disappointed. It's tough. Sometimes we sign up for tough things. Graduate school was tough. When I went to college, I had to study more my first semester in college than I did the whole time in high school. When I got to graduate school, I had to study more the first semester than the whole 4 years in college. When I got to PhD level work, it was a whole lot easier and a lot more fun. But still, it was a grind. I signed up for that. There are other things I didn't sign up for that have been painful, that will be difficult, that have been expensive. Nevertheless, God, I can say to you, everything that I've been through, no matter how painful, how bad, how hard, God has caused it to work together for my good. He's doing that for you. But it's a matter of what is your focus, what does it mean, and what are you going to do about it? So just imagine yourself beginning to accept this golden chain. He foreknew you. Jesus talked about that in Matthew 7, about being known by God. In Matthew 7, verse 21, Jesus is speaking. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. That passage always bothered me. This week, as I studied it and dug into it, it started making a little bit more sense to me. When he said, I never knew you, he didn't say, I never knew about you. He knew about you, but you might not have given him the opportunity to really get to be friends. This past week in Klamath Falls, I had the privilege of speaking in the Anglican church there. Got to put on a white robe with a long hanging down sash with some emblems on the bottom that I have no idea what they were about, and faked it as best I could. It was Trinity Sunday. I didn't know Trinity Sunday existed until a few days before. And they asked me to speak on Trinity Sunday. So I had to figure out what Trinity Sunday was. It's the only festival that's about a doctrine. The others are about a person or an event. This was about the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. And I thought, I got to scramble to come up with something with this. So I defaulted to Romans 8 because, you know, it's constantly talking about how the Father, the Son, and the Spirit are all working together. And I defaulted to Father Richard Rohr's book, The Divine Dance. In that book, Father Rohr talks about how before there was creation, there was God. And all the time, before there was time, God loved God. The Father loved the Son and the Spirit. The Son loved the Spirit and the Father. The Spirit loved the Son and the Father. They just kept loving each other and celebrating each other and honoring each other and enjoying each other. And he talks about in that book how all of you are invited to that divine dance. So many times in church, people are more focused on the rules than on the relationship. So many times people are more focused on the law of God than the love of God. And thus came the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the only group of people that Jesus was ever harsh with. They missed it. It's about the relationship. And you're invited to this divine dance. And as we looked in Romans chapter 8 to see what the Trinity had done for us, we realized that because of the Trinity, there is no condemnation. That means if there is shame or guilt in your life, it should not be there. God has done his part to remove it. Most of us still carry feelings of shame and guilt. We need to let those go. There's no condemnation. Why? We've been justified. We've been given the righteousness of God. Then he went on to say in Romans 8 that you live not as a slave to fear any longer. So now you can move from fear to love. Fear feels bad. Love feels good. You can live in that love. Your new emotional home can be things like love and joy and peace. And finally, he said, and you've been adopted into the family of God. You'll never, ever be left out again. Even if people aren't too happy with you today, you're always invited to that divine dance with God, and God will celebrate you because God foreknew you, predestined you, called you, justified you, and glorified you. That's the golden chain. Let's break it down. Let's understand it. Jesus talked about some of you I never knew. Isn't it cool that before the universe existed, God knew you? Have you ever gone to a place and the people kind of foreknew you? That's why when Bishop Fleming dropped by to ask me if I'd speak on Sunday, he kind of foreknew me. He had heard some things about me. It's kind of a nice thing when you know that people already know. God already knew about you and he found you worthy. So he foreknew you, then he predestined you. We talk about it here in Romans, but I also want to go to Ephesians, the first chapter. Look at a few scriptures there of just about what predestination is really about. Some of us, especially from Texas, the independent ones, we don't like the idea of somebody's got a plan and we got to do their plan. His plan is pretty broad. It's pretty good. I think you're going to like it when you realize what it is that you've been predestined to. Ephesians 1:5, he predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace, for which he blessed us in the beloved. We get down to verse 11. In him we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined. That's looking better. You get an inheritance out of this. You get something. It's not something you have to do. It's something you're going to be given according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will, so that we who were the first to hope in Christ might be to the praise of his glory. Skip down to the end of verse 14. It ends to the praise of his glory. I run across people nearly every day of my life who are trying to figure out what is God's will for my life. Well, I hope you picked up on what he just said. You've been predestined according to the purpose of him who works all things according to the counsel of his will. He's causing it to work together. Proverbs 16:9 says, a man plans in his heart, but it's the Lord who directs his steps. Now, you read scripture, you're going to see in every one of God's heroes, there were times in their life where they thought, I have hopelessly blown it. I've disobeyed. I've messed up. I've forfeited everything. There's no recovery for me. Let me tell you about the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. It's a story of God's love and grace and forgiveness and redemption. And you look at people like Moses, handed life on a silver platter, educated in the Pharaoh's court, brought into the royal family, had it made, destined for greatness. He got ahead of God. He disobeyed God. He killed the Egyptian. He got a 40-year timeout, backside of the wilderness. That might have been the first timeout. As a child whose parents often said, you want to go to the bathroom? And it wasn't to use the bathroom, it's to be beaten privately. So you want to go to the bathroom? No. What if my parents had said, why don't you just go to your room and think about that? I thought I'd take that over a beating in a bathroom any day of my life. You look at Moses, he got a 40-year timeout. Just go on the backside of the desert. Think about that for a while. But after he thought about it for 40 years, and now he's 80 years old, and it looks like he is beyond hope, God says, I think you're about ready. Showed up in the burning bush. Look at people like Zachariah and Elizabeth. A lot of people don't even know who they are. They were the parents of John the Baptist. They'd been married for years, probably since they were teenagers. People got married when they were teenagers. They'd been trying all their life to have a child. That was their number one goal, and they couldn't accomplish that. Gabriel, the angel, shows up. Elizabeth gets pregnant. They're old. She gets pregnant. They have John the Baptist. God foreknew them, predestined them, called them, justified them, glorified them. Took him a long time to do all of that, but they were going to be the parents, the wise, old, mature parents of who Jesus said he's the greatest man ever born of woman. It's a big compliment coming from the Lord Jesus Christ. And John the Baptist was going to prepare the way for the Lord and inaugurate his ministry. Pretty cool stuff. Nothing seemed to happen until right at the very end of their lives. Don't give up on God. He has put a plan in motion that includes you. He's foreknown you. He's predestined you. He's called you. In Romans 11, it says the gifts of God are irrevocable. They're without repentance. It's not, okay, as long as you obey me, I got a calling for you and I got some gifts for you. Go knock yourself out. But if you mess up, I'm taking it back. He doesn't do that. Once he's called you and gifted you, he's not going to take it back. It's yours forever and ever, according to the word of the Lord. Then we look at he's justified you. It doesn't matter what you did. Doesn't matter who you did it with. Doesn't matter how many times you did it. Doesn't matter how bad it was. He took all of your sin away. And when he justified you, it was a legal declaration by God that all of your sins are forgiven and you now have the righteousness of Christ. Now, what if you started focusing on these 5 things? And when you think about being glorified, that means you're going to be made like Jesus. When you're glorified, there's no more sin in your life. When you're glorified, you can do the things Jesus did. You look at how he lived. It was pretty cool. He traveled light, but whatever he needed showed up for him. If the disciples had already started to cross the sea and he didn't have a boat, he'd walk on the water. If his good friend Lazarus died, he'd raise him from the dead. If he couldn't feed the multitudes of people, the thousands, the 5s and 10s of thousands of people, he'd take a little boy's lunch and bless it and have leftovers. This is what it's like to be glorified. Jesus was glorified. Well, how do you get glorified? You keep your eyes on him. That's back to Tony's first question. What is your focus? You make Jesus your focus. I'm going to show you what happens in 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. We can pick up in verse 16. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Let's go back to Moses. He started meeting with God in the tent of meeting. Every time he'd come out, people would have to shield their face because the Shekinah glory was so all over him. He'd spend time with God, he'd glow. Spend time with God, you'll glow too. You'll be glorified. Every time you look at him, you step it up to another level of glory, another level of glory, another level of glory. We look at this, and we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. You've seen television shows and movies where somebody is kidnapped. Somebody comes over, put a black bag over their head. That's a veil. They can't see anything. They don't see where they're going. They don't see who they're with. And they finally see them in a dark, scary room and rip the bag off their head. And they can see who their captors are. Every time the veil comes over us, things that keep us from seeing clearly, that block our vision, every time we turn to Jesus, the veil is lifted. Every turn we turn to Jesus, freedom comes. So as you're going through your day-to-day and challenges come, you can look, you can focus on the challenge, or you can look and focus at Jesus. When you do that, you're going to be glorified, you're going to see more clearly, and you're going to have more freedom. In the last few days, I've had several things that have just ripped away my freedom, put me back in fear and depression. As I look at Jesus, the veil is lifted, I see clearly, I'm glorified, and freedom comes. You can get on a rapid track with that. Focus on Jesus. Focus on Jesus. What does it mean? What does it mean that you have this golden chain? It means in your life, there is no reason for you to be anxious. There's no reason for you to be afraid. There's no reason for you to worry, because God has looked ahead. He's put a plan in motion. He has predestined you. He has called you. He's justified you. He's glorified you, and he's going to make it work. No matter what happens, he's going to make it work. Everyone in this room has had tragedy in their life. But with Jesus, no tragedy is permanent, because he's going to cause all of it to work together for your good. So we look at these things, this golden chain that God offers us. What if that became your emotional home? What if you woke up in the morning and you thought, God has known me since before the creation of anything and everything, and God predestined me, and God called me for his purposes, and he justified it. He took away all of my sin, not up until the point I was trying to say all of my sin for my whole life. He took it all away, and he gave me the righteousness of Christ. And he's even now glorifying me, making me like Jesus. You look at it in modern terms, Jesus is a superhero. Jesus is a genius. This book about him is still the bestseller in the world. He's pretty glorified. Not everybody's recognized his glory, but ultimately everybody will bow to him and recognize the glory of Jesus. And you're going to be seated with him on his throne. It's a pretty cool deal. I'm going to go back to Tony Robbins and wrap this up. As all this happened on 9/11, he thought, okay, there's a lot of stuff I have no control over, but I have control over these next 10 days. And we're going to change these people's lives. And what we're going to do about this is we're going to help these people who hate each other. There were some people in that conference that said, the attack on your World Trade Center is retribution. And I wish I'd been on the plane. Well, that didn't fly over too well. So he had some real hostility from different worldviews from the whole planet. And by the end of that conference, the Jews and the Arabs were hugging each other and coming together to bring peace in the Middle East. He did something about it. He remembered when he was 11 years old, it was Thanksgiving. His family was broke. All they had in the house to eat were saltine crackers and butter on Thanksgiving Day. Mom and dad were fighting. They were fighting because he was a lousy provider and she was not happy with it. They were yelling and screaming and cursing at each other. His little brother and his little sister were crying. He was trying to shield them from angry parents, and there was a knock on the door. He opened the door. There's a tall man at the door that had 2 armfuls of groceries and a little cart behind him with more stuff. And Tony lit up. He was
Wait, hold on just a second.
What's the word? You're phobic? You're aerobic? Euphoric. Thank you. I need help from the audience. He was euphoric. He was overjoyed. He was so happy. He ran in and said, hey, Dad, there's a guy at the door with a bunch of food for us. And his dad was still yelling. His mother said, I'm busy, son. You go deal with him. Tell him to go away. So Tony goes and tells the man to go away. The man stands here and he said, I really need to talk. Go back. Tell him a friend sent me. And he finally goes to the door and he says, listen, we don't take charity here. He says, not charity. It's one of your friends. I'm just the delivery boy. He knew you were having a tough time, wanted you to have a good Thanksgiving. So he asked me to bring this food to you. So that's what I wanted to do. And he tries to slam the door on. Well, he's already got a foot in the door. He's got these bags of groceries. He's got 1 bag of groceries, cans and stuff. It'll kind of block a door. Tried to slam the door the second time. Tony said, I thought he was going to hit the guy in the face. He was so angry, but finally the guy just kind of unloaded it on him and said, have a great Thanksgiving, and left. Tony could not figure out why and how his father was so unhappy. He thought, man, Thanksgiving just fell in our lap. It's wonderful. But later he started to figure it out. He came up with these ideas I presented. What was his father's focus? His father's focus is, I'm a lousy husband, I'm a lousy provider, and we have nothing on Thanksgiving Day except saltines and butter. What was the meaning of that? To his father, I am a failure. What's he going to do about it? A few weeks later, he left and he never came back again. Father number 4. Tony loved him like a biological father, but he saw himself as a failure and he left. You've been given a golden chain by God. Tony grew up poor. What's the meaning of it? He remembered his father always said, strangers will not help you. They don't care about you. And then this stranger shows up with a load of food. Tony made a new decision that day. He thought, strangers do help me. And if strangers care about me, I need to care about strangers. So that's what it meant. He needs to care about strangers. He was 11 years old on this Thanksgiving Day. When he was 17 years old and driving, still not successful financially or professionally, he borrowed a friend's van. He went to one of the local churches and said, hey, I grew up poor. Is there anybody in your church who probably has nothing for Thanksgiving and they've got too much pride to ask for help? And they said, yeah, we'll give you a couple of addresses. Well, he kind of knew that they're probably going to be Hispanic and Spanish speaking. So he wrote them a note in English. Hey, we all have tough times. Just want to be sure you had a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully someday you can pay this forward to somebody else, a friend. Then he had one of his friends write the same message in Spanish just to be sure they could read it. Of those two houses he went to the grocery store, loaded up the shopping cart, said it was the most exciting shopping trip he ever had in his life. He was having so much fun loading up two shopping carts, putting them in the van, delivering them. One of those families, the father had left the week before Thanksgiving and left them with no money and no food. They had 4 little boys under 10 years old. They lit up like a Christmas tree. They were euphoric. They were so excited to get the food from Tony. The next Thanksgiving, he took food to 4 families. The next Thanksgiving, 8 families. The next Thanksgiving after that, he had a small business. He got everybody in his company involved, delivered a lot more. He is now committed to giving away 1 billion meals. Thus far, he's given away 850 million. Probably today, he's reached that billion mark of meals to the poor. Why? He shifted his focus to strangers don't care to I'm going to care about strangers. He thought the meaning is it's good to help other people. And then the action he took, he started feeding hungry people. He did it. He says these 3 questions will change your life. They'll change your emotional home. And when you put on top of this the golden chain that God foreknew you, predestined you, called you, justified you, took away all your shame and guilt and sin, and he is in a process now of glorifying you and making you like Jesus. What does that mean? You've been adopted into the family of God. It means you cannot fail. It means God in all of his power is behind you, and he will accomplish his purposes in your life.